So this last bit of the classical era, this last bit of the second period of AP world history, is arguably the most important aspect to world history. It's bringing civilizations and societies together and talking about how things are impacted, how things change as we come together. So we're saving almost here the best for last. We've talked about the civilizations. Now we're going to talk about how they come in contact. 231 deals with trade. I'm going to give you 4 trade routes that will exist during this classical period. And we will experience talking about these trade routes for the rest of the year. We're not ever going to take any of these trade routes away. In fact, all we're going to do is add another one to it. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. We'll add that trade route to it. But these trade routes will stick with us throughout the entire year. So, without further ado, let's introduce you to the Silk Road. Silk Road, connecting East Asia to the Eastern Mediterranean. East Asia, China, to the Eastern Mediterranean. So the Silk Road will connect the people of Han China to the people of the Middle East and the Roman Empire. Notice where, at least on this map, the Silk Road is said to begin in the city of Chang'an, which we mentioned the other day, capital of the Han Dynasty. All right? Now, we call it the Silk Road, but don't think of it as just one road. It's really a network of roads and trails. Also, this spans for thousands of miles. It is not going to be a situation where a dude grabs something at the beginning of the Silk Road and he takes it all the way to the Mediterranean. It's going to be more of a Pony Express style situation. You guys are familiar with Pony Express? Where a guy gets a letter, he rides a horse, and then the horse is really tired, and he passes it off to the next guy, and then they pass it off to the next guy, and they pass it off to the next guy. So trade will travel in that kind of direction. Question I had in the back?
I was going to ask, you said
East Asia to the Mediterranean, yep. What's getting traded on the Silk Road? Silk, good. Silk will be traded. Shocker. It's the most important thing that will make it to the Mediterranean world from China is going to be the silk. Europeans couldn't make silk. At the end of the day, we'll watch a little video on how it's done, but Europeans couldn't do it. Europeans couldn't do it. So silk, tea leaves. Tea will be traded. Dried tea leaves. Porcelain. Europeans didn't know how to make porcelain. The fine china that might be on your parents' in your parents' cabinet, we call it china because the Chinese invented the porcelain that those dishes and plates were made out of. So we call it china today. Today it may or may not be made in China because the rest of the world now knows how to make it. But then this stuff only came out of China. Note, silk, to a less extent tea, porcelain. What do they all have in common? They're not all glass. Silk is not glass. What do they all have in common? They're from China, sure. Silk, tea leaves, porcelain. What's that? They're not necessities. You can live your life. So what do we call those goods that we might buy that are not necessities? They're luxuries. These are all luxury items. These are all luxury items, especially the silk and the porcelain. These are things that regular folks couldn't afford, didn't need. Now, if any of you guys are into like crafts or knitting or sewing or anything like that, you might go to Joann Fabrics and see the big bolts of cloth, right? If you were going to buy a bolt, it's this big, long, round-up thing of cloth or textiles. If you were to buy a bolt of cotton, right? If you were to buy a bolt of cotton, it'd be far cheaper than a bolt of silk, right? But if you're going to be taking goods from Chang'an all the way to the Mediterranean Sea and beyond, that's going to be an expensive shipping cost, right? You better be shipping things that are valuable, that you can exact a high price for them. So traditionally, when we have this long-distance trade, we are only trading in things that are luxury goods, that can bring in a lot of money compared to their weight, all right? So these are luxury goods. They're also durable goods. A durable good is something that doesn't spoil, doesn't go bad, or at least takes a long time to go bad. Silk, it'll last forever. Porcelain, it'll last until you break it. tea, I don't know, dried tea leaves, I guess something, they can kind of lose their flavor over time, but they're not going to spoil overnight. So these are all durable goods, all right? The Chinese will send it to the West. And what's going back towards China? Nothing but gold and silver. There's nothing over here that the Chinese need or want except the gold and silver. That will be an important story as we make it through the rest of the year. Second route, TransSaharan Trade Network. TransSaharan Trade Network. Trans means across. Trans means across. So the Trans-Saharan Trade Network is across the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is much of the northern third of Africa. It's the biggest desert on the planet, right? So Trans-Saharan Trade is anything that's going from south of the Sahara, or if you want to sound fancier, you'll say sub-Saharan Africa, to the north of the Sahara or along the Mediterranean coast. Gold and salt, and eventually slaves, are the primary trade items on this Trans-Saharan slave network, or Trans-Saharan Trade Network. Gold, salt, slaves. Goods would travel over this network on camel caravans. Groups of camels that would be loaded up and take their wares across the desert, obviously led by camel drivers. Guys that would drive the camel. It could take up to 70 to 90 days to traverse the Saharan Desert. You can imagine how miserable that journey would be. But obviously worth it. How do we know it was worth it? They did it. If it wasn't worth it, we wouldn't be talking about this. Yes, ma'am? Gold and salt, and later the slave trade. Third trade, yes, ma'am? Sub-Saharan Africa, south of the Sahara Desert to the north. Primarily, it's like Western Africa. This is a lot of like dense rainforest and jungle in here. So south of the Sahara Desert to north of the Sahara Desert. Third, the Indian Ocean sea lanes. Indian Ocean sea lanes. Indian Ocean sea lanes. This is a sea-based trade route that will skirt the African coast. I don't know what happened there. Skirt the African coast, South Asia, and connect it to Indonesia. Spices are the primary good traded on this route. For the Indian Ocean network, mastering of the monsoon winds will contribute to trade in this network. Yes? Spices. Spices. You guys look in your spice rack at home, you're going to find most of them have their origins in South Asia or Indonesia. Yes? Go ahead. Yeah, just from East Africa around to India and then over to Indonesia. So connecting East Africa, the Middle East, India, and Indonesia. Mastering the monsoon winds was vital. Monsoon winds are seasonal winds. And we can see here that from April to September, so kind of like our spring and summer, you've got monsoon winds that would push ships to the north. And then from the winter months, November into February roughly, you'd have monsoon winds that would go the other direction. So sailors would take advantage of these winds to trade their wares. Then finally, yes, ma'am.
I just had a question from April to September.
We'll go back here. April to September going to the north, and then over the winter months to the south. You'll never be asked that. Just understand monsoon winds dictated a lot of this trade. And then finally, Mediterranean sea lanes. So we've got 2 land-based trade routes, 2 sea-based trade routes. Here's the Mediterranean. You guys could probably take some guesses at what was traded on the Mediterranean. Think of like Greek restaurants or maybe Italian restaurants. Olives, big. Olive oil, big. Wine, big. And again, these are all pretty durable goods. They're not going to spoil too quickly. Olives, olive oil, wine, cotton from Egypt. Egypt produced a lot of cotton that would be traded into Rome. Yes, ma'am?
What is this called again?
This is the Mediterranean sea lanes.
Okay.
It's connecting North Africa to Europe to the Middle East. Good? Sea lane. All right, the next section deals with technologies. What kinds of technologies will contribute to greater trade along these routes? Only got a couple things to mention to you. First, this is a yoke. Y-O-K-E. Y-O-K-E. A yoke. A yoke is how you would harness pack animals with each other to pull a wagon or a cart that you might be trading with. Domestic pack animals are things like oxen, or even camels and horses, or in the Americas, llamas. These are animals that can carry stuff for you. So development of a yoke would allow an animal to pull a heavy weight without choking itself. And then you could mount animals together to pull even more. And then new saddles. Especially for camels. The development of a camel saddle will allow those animals to carry more over greater distances. So these are people in the old world in Afro-Eurasia using the animals they had and coming up with technologies that will enhance what those animals can do. That's for land-based trade. For sea trade, we also have some developments. The ship you see here is what is known as a dhow, D-H-O-W. A dhow is a sailing vessel used primarily in the Indian Ocean trade network. It has a large triangular sail. That is called a lateen sail. Why triangular sails? Why is that important for sailing? Anybody know anything about sailing? Yes, sir? It actually might not catch as much wind than a larger rectangular sail. Yeah. Mobility, very good. You can more easily adjust a triangular sail to the left and right rather than a big square sail that you would have to move like maybe 2 masts to do it. You can more easily adjust it to do what's called tacking against the wind. And we'll watch a little video in a moment. For my YouTube friends, you guys just Google it and you can find something like this to see how a triangular sail will connect us, or will allow us to sail against the wind. Yes? A lateen is the triangular sail, and the lateen sail is often found on a ship called a dhow. So it allows these ships to go against the wind. It allows these ships to go against the wind. And then also for navigational advances, just the understanding of those monsoon winds and the seasonal nature of those monsoon winds will allow traders to more effectively trade on the open seas. Nothing surprising there. All right, we're already 2/3 of the way done. 2, 3, 3. As people will travel in trade, ideas will travel in trade. As people will travel in trade, ideas will travel in trade. What you see here is the origination of rice land, like where rice was originally grown on the planet. Now today we might most associate rice with China, but we can see that there isn't any rice up in China yet. In fact, from your reading, what was the most important grain in China? Millet. Now, you guys don't know much about millet, right? Certainly not a staple in our neck of the woods. But it was the original grain that provided most of the nourishment in China. Rice wasn't there. But as the Chinese began to trade more, especially with Southeast Asia, they bring the rice north. And we can see from there, rice will make it in the 4th century BCE over into the Middle East. Today, if you go to a Middle Eastern restaurant eating Middle Eastern cuisine, you might get rice as a side dish. And eventually, after 1492, rice is going to make it to the Americas. Today, if you go to a Mexican restaurant, you're probably going to get rice as a side dish. So this originated in Southeast Asia and in India, but will make its way all the way across the planet by today. Also cotton. Oh, it just dropped all the way under here. What a disaster. Also cotton. Cotton is originally a Middle Eastern agricultural product. And from there, it's going to spread to other parts of the world, eventually even into the Americas. It was never in the Americas until it was brought here. So rice and cotton spreading. In addition to actual foodstuffs moving, like stuff that we grow moving, we're going to come up with new technological ideas, or at least if someone's got an idea and traders come in to trade, we will see what you're doing and we'll take it back with us. This irrigation system began in the Middle East. It's called the Qanat, Q-A-N-A-T. I learned last year that that is an Arabic word for channel. Like what's that? Yes, very good. I learned that last year from one of my students. So what they would do is they would tap into an aquifer, underground water, right? A groundwater system. Tap into an aquifer at a higher plane, like maybe in a hill. They'd tap in there and they'd dig a channel to that aquifer so that water would slowly make its way out to irrigate above ground land, obviously. All right? Harder to pump this up. Easier to dig a channel and let gravity do a lot of the work for you. So when traders come across this idea of the Qanat, that will start to expand to other areas. It's not just going to be good technological ideas that will spread. We will also see horrible diseases spreading on trade routes. This is a story in the classical period, and it's not going to disappear. All right? We even see it in the modern age, right? When West Africa recently had their Ebola crisis, Americans that had traveled to West Africa, some brought it back with them, right? So when you travel and trade and make contacts with different parts of the world, sometimes you bring diseases with you. So diseases are going to be an issue during this period, especially smallpox and measles. And here's where we're talking about both Rome and China and how these diseases can contribute to the fall of these civilizations. First, for China, they will have smallpox and measles epidemics in the 2nd century and in the 3rd century and in the 4th century. You don't have to memorize the dates or anything like this. But for many in China, this is going to be decimating to the population. But it's also going to push many Chinese to search for some higher understanding of the world that they're living in, as people around you might be falling to diseases. And as more and more in China start to succumb to the diseases, we're going to see a religion grow in China. What religion do you think that will be? Buddhism will grow in China. Absolutely. Same for the Roman Empire. The Romans will suffer from epidemic outbreaks of smallpox and measles. One in the year 165, another in the year 251. You need not know those years. That will lead to a population decline and a weakening of the Roman Empire. But just like we saw with the Buddhists in China, we're going to see a religion grow as many people are going to lose friends and family members to these horrible diseases. What religion will that be in the Roman world? Christianity will rise. So as you begin to fear your own death, you might look for an answer in the afterlife. And for Buddhists in China and for Christians in the Roman Empire, their religions would give them that comfort.